Only Sam and I know where Orson is. Only Sam believes where Orson is. I talked with him, yes. I don't know how I managed to at last. Refusing or accepting wasn't going to work without that, I assume. I remember that. It hadn't for a while now. I think about 9 months. That's a bit odd to say. I also should mention I don't know if I will continue speaking with him like you suggested. Instead of that advice, I am taking the writing one again about the why and the where, about where Orson is and what happened to him before all that, and of course my feelings for the same purpose of talking with Sam, which I think you'll appreciate. We'll see how it'll turn out. Orson gave me the 8-shaped necklace before he told me about the Osiris program. I was too worried about the idea of the baby being born an 8-month like the doctor had said, especially when the baby had pieced together the last unfixed pieces of our marriage. It was starting to affect my sleep, so of course his too. He gave me the necklace after that. He said there was nothing we could do, and it was time that was going to decide what was going to happen. And so that the only way we would be okay was that if we embraced it instead of refusing what was happening. And also after the 8 months, he would give me another gift he promised. Like a charm, it worked. I put the 8 on my neck right then and didn't take it off whenever I did, whatever. It's still on my neck. You probably seen it many times. After that, I asked him if he embraced it too. He confirmed it and I proposed we get him one too then. He declined on the account that there was no need. His way of showing how he was embracing it was different. That's when he told me he had accepted to go to the Osiris program. I wasn't happy with it, but I couldn't blame him.
And this was a part of his character. I accepted after I had scared you to see me. I wanted to see the first issues because he says to his character.
Some kids decide to do his jobs because it's so interesting and meticulous. His reason was to get away from home. He became that way after the cancellation of the divorce. As far as possible, he went to the first Osiris program with Sam, who had already signed up for the second. It was the first Osiris route in their department, meaning they were the firsts, which was pumping me up full of angst. But before he went, he told me it'd be all right. He told me it was just another exploration mission around a station that was placed in Osiris. That was the idea which was giving me hope. Only after hearing it was just an exploration program, I managed to cling on to that hope that everything would be fine when he came back. And explorations were never long. This one was assumed to be exactly 7 months, which was convenient for us. You could imagine my surprise, or whatever word there is for what I was, when he returned 32 months later. It was 7 months in Osiris time, not Earth. The mission wasn't just an exploration. It was an exploration of a time dilation source in Osiris. You could also imagine his surprise when he saw his wife with more wrinkles, a few more health issues, and a straight stomach. And also the baby room, which was on a course to returning back to an office room. Selling the crib had taken me a lot of time and effort. It was a lazy and a slow course, but by his return, it definitely looked more like an office than a baby room. That's how and when his time perception issues had started. Also the green room incidents. I'd refused the fact that I was not sleeping anymore. I was thinking that in any moment I could go to sleep, so I didn't get out of bed. But now I'll say that was only because I wasn't accepting that my Orson was having issues. Again, now I can say that if you are going to refuse, you have to accept first. That's how those days were going, and that's how I realized he wasn't sleeping, was out of the bed. Me refusing the fact that I wasn't sleeping meant I was staring at the ceiling for hours. Didn't make a difference. One of those days I woke up and saw he wasn't there. Like you said, I was trying to give him some space, some time, and I did, for a week until I couldn't. He was doing it every single day. His situation was exacerbating, and space and time wasn't really helping him. I failed accepting that. And also I was at the point where I was starting to put the blame on him for the way he was. My desire was too tangible, I guess, so that I woke up at the middle of the night. I turned to the kitchen first, thinking he might be smoking or eating or whatever. He wasn't. There was a light coming from the baby's room. From the office, rather. A green light. A weird feeling of refusal accompanied me on my walk there. The first thing that captured my eye when I entered the room was the density. The whole room was swarmed with that dense green light. It took me a while to, for some reason, to understand that he had changed the bulb to green. And then only after a second or two I realized Orson was crouched and was leaning back to the side wall, just sitting there. In all honesty, it was one of the scariest moments of my life. The strength sapped away from my legs. My knees buckled. It was that day when I had thought that Orson was gone, My Orson. I remember thinking what happened to my Orson, as if the man I knew had gone somewhere, and I couldn't change that. It became a daily routine of mine from until that day to ask myself every time I saw him where Orson was. Still wonder it. Change is a scary thing. Time is a scary thing, Yan. I asked him all kinds of questions. Why had he changed the light bulb to green like that? What he was doing, why he was doing it, and many more. He answered everything with the same answer, told me he was just passing the time. Nothing else came out of his mouth that meant something different. Next 4 weeks were exactly the same. He'd wake up at night, go to the green room, sit there. I never saw him in the bed when I woke up in all of that time period. After numerous fights on the verge of getting physical, I quit chasing him to there. I didn't know what to do. I was just watching the time drift by, not anything else. I woke up, wondered where Orson was. Not the one in the green room, my Orson. That was it. Then, in the first of the month, one morning he was. In bed, I mean. Wasn't sleeping. I woke up and he was up sitting on the feet end, his back turned to me. You know when you'd somehow know something was going on even when you were asleep? That's what woke me up that day. I woke up, I saw him sitting like that, and I knew something was going to take a turn for the worst somehow. I called for him and he replied right away. Said he wanted to try again. Now, as you know, I didn't want that. I never wanted that. But I never got to fully explain my reasoning to you. Until that day he was refusing everything, he had even suggested moving. It was feeling like everything was the same, and everything was a part of that. A bland, blurry unity of something. It didn't change the issue at hand. The problem we talked about for me was the same for him back then. It was a clear-cut quandary between acceptance and refusal, and I was still wearing the 8. But his totem of acceptance was long outdated. He was back from Osiris, and he needed a new one. I couldn't deter him. He refused. He refused accepting the situation, and he was asking for a new totem for refusing, a new baby. Well, I didn't know what to make of it. I had felt like my Orson was really, really gone, and this man was trying to be there instead of him. It was as if he was trying to fill a shell of our old life with the current one. Looking back, I don't want to get on his throat like I wanted to back then, especially when I think about the old me and what I did. I am not judging him. Not just judging. Perhaps this is me trying to handle my end, or just trying to figure out where my Orson is. She scratched her chest underneath where the 8 is, until it got red, then swapped the scratch with a sting feeling. Then we got into it. For hours, days, weeks, fights, long silences that extended to hours, crying, all me, curses and demeaning remarks all over. I did everything in my power to revert his ask, his need, but he didn't back down. It wasn't a conscious attempt. He was like that, silent, immutable, beat me into being the same way after a while. After our clash became a stillness conflict, he was showing signs of distress and trauma again. That's when I told him, with the last ounce of character I had left, the only way to move forward was that if we accepted our situation, and only time had the say on what was going to happen. He only agreed on the second part. He kept insisting we try again. This went on for a while, like I said. After hitting brick walls, we moved on to more direct points. He was becoming less eloquent at these points in axiomatic fashion, which was really disturbing me. I became aware of the situation enough to pull some of my punches, even though I was clear on the fact that I didn't want to try again. So I told him. I told him that a new supply of hope could be destructive for us. Things might go the same way again, and we might not be able to accept it this time. To this he only said the thing. Just time alone is fabricated hope. What we will have is real hope. He explained why he said this for about 3 hours that day. The most he had talked. His main point was time, and I know this wasn't supposed to mean anything to me. Time was the reason he was sick, you said, I know that. But his points remained solid in my head. He said just time was fabricated hope. Was it not? We were not doing anything except leaning back onto time, hoping someday it was all going to fix itself, as if it was time's job to fix things. Everything would persist to be the same if nothing changed. And time changing for us, that wasn't enough change after that point. Once something happens like this, you forget everything you know, or worse, you quit believing in them. All that intrigues you becomes what you don't know, so you lean on time and what its unending stretch will bring to you. You squeeze hope into what you don't know. You fabricate hope in mystery, uncertainty, blank. Because what you know denies hope. I think about that a lot. Since he is gone, I think about it a lot, even more than I did back then. And back then, it made me think, will this bring my Orson back? This was becoming visible for him, I suppose, because he told me he didn't want to affect my decision to that much a degree. He went to Sam for a few days that week, which I didn't care about at the time. I knew it was partly because of my fits, too. Well, that's what it all did for me, affected my thinking even more. Just time is fabricated hope. I couldn't think much about else. He returned a few days later. We tried again. I thought of my Orson. Time wasn't slowed down for the first time that night after a month of stillness. The night wasn't frozen, and the other side of the bed wasn't cold, as if frozen too. There wasn't a green light on the hall. And those were the days when we were only arguing about the decision. I thought to myself, it would bring my Orson back if we decided to refuse what had happened to us, refuse the stillness of time and the hope and the pointless drifting in it. I thought nothing changes if nothing changes. The very morning of the night we tried again, we went to the doctor to see. Doctor said I was pregnant. The very night of that morning was when the night I woke up and saw the green light seeping onto the corridor again. That was the day I signed in to see you, Jan, alone. I felt the time's fabric changing when I stepped toward the green room. It slowed down with heaviness, smothered the brain with its rotted smell of scents. I saw him sleeping on the carpet in the room and stepped in as the frantic rage controlled me. A ravenous scream to the man I didn't know. The man that was supposed to be my Orson but wasn't, spit itself out my mouth. I yelled at him. I was mad at him as if he knew where my Orson was, as if he was a messenger to him. Why the hell are you here again? Because he was there instead of Orson. He said he was having trouble sleeping near me. Now I think it was because of the baby. The reason I think that is connected to the time he wanted to go to the Osiris. We've had a talk about why he was wanting to go, before the divorce risks had surfaced. About the real reason he wanted to go. Essentially, he was nervous about the baby's birth. More than me. This was gradually transforming into an actual issue back at the time. He was having trouble maintaining his composure. On top of this, he was wanting to go for a program for a while. I think this was due to our violent disagreements, and also the prior talks of having a baby way before we decided. I suppose I gave him enough excuse by doing some things I don't want to mention. He told me that he thought it was a good idea to go. I didn't view that as irresponsible, uncaring, or anything of the sort. In fact, I thought it was responsible in a concurrently hateful way, since I had accepted his character to be that, the kind that avoided problems, but he was doing something to palliate it. Yes, so that's another reason he went to the Osiris program while we were expecting. And to come back to the reason why he was sleeping on the green room instead of sleeping with me in the bed, is that I believe he wasn't dealing with the stress of the coming baby. That's just who he is. That's what I'll say now. Some husbands watch sports to relieve themselves, to have comfort. Some of them do sports, a few work, and few buy shiny things for their wives. He prefers to put distance between him and the problem, move away as much as he can to move on. This is the first reason I believe for his decision to sleep in the green room. The second one is in the rest of his answer to my question that night. He went on with his answer.
That was another odd one to listen to.
He told me that it reminded him of his time in Osiris. There was not much stuff on the room. It was virtually empty, also green. So, he told me that it gave him some comfort. It relaxed him, freed him, you know? It made me mad again. I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't yell the second time, though. Just asked him what was in that room that he valued so much. Explained that I couldn't understand it. Obviously, it was about the baby. The first one, that's not how he said it, of course. Time, he said. There is time in there. Free, quiet, and aging time. It helps me sleep. Still bothers me. Bothers me more, actually, when I think about what it means. I now know that I didn't get what he meant when he said that back then. Still, I understood it enough to get that his situation was becoming worse. It was sufficient to realize that he was viewing my pregnancy as if it was for the first baby, as if I was going to give birth to the baby that we have lost. This notion became clearer and was confirmed when we began discussing the baby's name, which he wanted to be Rhea, the name we had picked for the first baby. Just like before, I thought of it again. Maybe this will help me find my Orson, I thought. Because briefly, the question about Orson's whereabouts seemed to have somewhat of an answer. The past. She scratched the spot under her 8 necklace. The urge to scratch it kept accruing as her fingernails brushed back and forth on it. She pressed the cold plate of the necklace on the itch with significant force for a momentary relief, enough force for the 8 to leave a mark on the skin. Her gaze reeled in on the mark, then fixated on it as it started unhurriedly waning. The red fading away, leaving behind small spots of contact indications that were eventually going to fade away too. She continued staring at the spot for a while. I didn't know what to do with that. It was a scary thing to process, something a normal people wouldn't say or think or offer. Besides, nothing was to change in my opinion. I wasn't viewing the issue in the same manner. No one should have. I refused the old name. Back at me he came, of course. He didn't accept the new one. Like that, we snowballed into a cycle of disagreements. In the back of my mind, I was hopeful still, subordinate to the coming of the baby. My thinking was that the severeness of this situation of his would abate as the time flowed. My Orson would come back that way. The issue with that was, some things did not do that. My pregnancy signs were stalling. For the first 9 weeks, not one symptom, whether it was puking, morning sickness, cravings, back pain, bleeding, or breast swelling, was introduced to me. And these are mostly 5th-week signs. The only ones that I had were fatigue and headaches, which nor me or Orson thought was strong enough evidence to connect to the pregnancy. We went to the doctor after these. I went. He was in the green room and I didn't want him to come anyway. The doctor notified me that all seemed and late signs were somewhat common. I told all this to Orson, but he couldn't make himself believe them. He hadn't told me this, but it was evident by his mannerism and everything. And like the baby name situation, I was once again proved to be valid on my thoughts by the next milestone of his exacerbation, the nailing of the windows of the green room with wood planks and painting the room the old color. By the time he was all into it, the only thing I managed to get out of him as for the reason was, he said the need for using the green room in the morning as well. Like that, this person that was supposed to be my Orson was getting farther and farther away from that. His personality had already left the shell. His appearance was doing the same, going farther away from the first place, just like my Orson had. Where was my Orson? Where was this guy going? Was he going to come back with the baby? The rest of every question or attempt at conversing with him was returned to by nods, shakes of the head, blinks either for approval or saying no, and that sort of thing. She paused for a moment. Something made her. Perhaps a thought or a feeling or an instinct. The passing of time, it was the only thing taking place. The light kept illuminating the paper. The paper kept standing on the desk. Sound of the wind continued accompanying her. Small trickles of the rain remained trickling. The simple and uncomplicated realization accommodated her mind. It was all this that made her pause, in the middle of a thought she was putting to words. She rested her ears at the sounds and her gaze at the sights contemplatively. I thought to myself those days that when the baby came, there'd be no reason for us not to move on. Every day there opened an occasion fit for me to tell this to myself. I tried many times to tell it to him too, but to no avail, of course. Things continued as we waited for the baby. There was not a single beam of light entering the green room from the outside. There was not a single time when he joined me in the bed. The weeks slowed again. I felt as though I was being pulled and pushed constantly to the past, along with him, to the moment when we got the news of the first baby. The bad news. The first 11 weeks passed like this, slow and heavy. Then I finally started puking. Puked! Wanted strange good. Nausea too. Things were so off the rails. Orson was so off the rails that I was not expecting any of the good reactions once I had from him to my signs. Rightly so, he doubled the boards on the green room to fully shut the light. This said light was maybe merely enough to unveil some dust in the air. Then he started building a cradle. Didn't move the office desk, though. I protested, but then he would stutter and sometimes hit his head with his palm. He would say he was sorry. He would try to kiss me to apologize, but it would be a weird, blank, and dead kind of a kiss, you know? And he wasn't doing all this in panic mode or anything. That made it all the more difficult to bear it. He seemed like Orson, but wasn't. Then he bought clocks, more clocks, for the wall and both his wrists. He bought more bulbs, green ones, of course. These things dragged on until my puking stopped, my cravings grew, and in general my pregnancy advanced. He bought more bulbs, more clocks, more boards. Those didn't stop. Every other week I woke up, and the green light seeping into the corridor would be denser and more obvious as the baby came closer. I would literally hear the ticking of the clocks from the hall. sometimes along with the sound of a hammer hitting boards, or maybe the paint brushing the same colored walls. At the first day of the 8th month, he was at his strangest. The number of the clocks and green bulbs and the painting was at their highest. He was too energetic and too anxious. I remember finding it strange that he was trying to stay out of the green room that day. He'd mostly fail and jump back in and come out for a few minutes, rub my stomach and go back in with an apology. He literally did that for the whole day with random intervals. I heard him crying at the green room from the bed at night, and when I woke up in the morning, there was no green light spilling into the hall. He was gone. That's it. So, I talked to you. I talked to Sam. I talked to myself. I didn't really talk to Sam, actually. Sam talked to me. I got his letter a few months earlier. In his letter, he mentioned how Orson had gone to see him in August. That was the 8th month of the pregnancy. He mentioned how Orson had asked him whether he was handling the PTSD about the time difference adaptation, and how Orson looked like he wasn't. He mentioned he looked off, unstable, worrying that day. He said, but everything is well, he is with me. We'll have some time off. He'll be better after a few years. I mentioned that Sam had signed up for the second route. That's it. So where is Orson? I know it. Sam knows it. Better than both of us, Time knows it. She scratched her chest once again before taking the 8 necklace out, her gaze fixated on the 8. Puking, nausea, cravings related to things more important than food, headaches. She rotated the 8 sideways. A longer stare continued itself on the sideways 8, for a long, stretched, slow-burning 9 seconds, which she hadn't intended for. She recounted what he said in the voice message he had sent her before the day he arrived. We went into the station, and it was in there. She stared at him. It was all green, it was moving and contorting and spilling and flowing. She continued staring in bewilderment. It was time in there. I could feel it moving, alive. I felt it on my skin and my vision, my hair and my eyelashes and my breath. It touched and pierced everything in it. I could feel it flowing and growing and shrinking at the same time. It was moving, and I was getting older, faster than normal. I could feel it. I felt it. It was hard to track it. Impossible, maybe, actually. Yes, time moved faster in there, in that green room. And if it wasn't for that place, I don't know how I could endure being away from you for such a long time. But it felt like only a couple of days to me.